So, driving around town in this 2026 Mazda CX-90 Turbo Premium Plus, it's a wonderful experience as usual. And as I've mentioned on this channel, if you haven't checked out our full tour and review of this CX-90 as well as every other CX-90 and 70 we have reviewed on this channel, from the Turbo S to the plug-in hybrid, this is our first time driving the actual turbo, the base engine option you can get, even though this is a Premium Plus version of said turbo. And just like the Turbo S, it's pretty much the exact same engine, just that one has a bit more boost and some components to make it have a little bit more power. But the 280 horsepower here is plenty, and it fuels way more than 280, I can tell you that. Now, I did notice for this 2026 model year, especially with this particular 20-inch tire, this overall suspension feels a little bit more cushy than it once did before. Not to say that it feels like soft or like there's wobbly body movements whatsoever, but it does feel not as crashy and hard, especially as the first CX-90 that we drove almost like 2 or 3 years ago now, which is pretty crazy. So they've definitely made some improvements in that department, and it is a noticeable change. I feel a bit more refinement in this overall platform now that we're in the 2026 model year. And otherwise, you know, as I mentioned in our video of the full tour and review, there isn't much real difference for the 2026 model year other than some trim packaging as well as paint options as well. I'll pop it into sport mode here for a quick little uphill acceleration run. Love this inline-6 sound here. Oh, this engine is just magnificent. This is the engine you want to go for in the CX-90 and the CX-70. Yes, you can get the plug-in hybrid, but let me tell you, you're going to want this inline-6. I think it gets honestly around the same-ish miles per gallon as that plug-in hybrid. I think long-term it's going to be a little bit more reliable for you, and I think on a daily basis, this is all you need. You got a lot of low-end torque. It sounds fantastic, and you still have this 48-volt mild hybrid system to bring you to a really smooth stop in stop-and-go situations. It coasts and shuts off on the highway. The engine turns on without you really even knowing, thanks to this 48-volt system. It's just pretty much exactly how BMW and Mercedes build their 48-volt systems. It's really, really good. I've always been raving about this every time I get in a CX-90 or 70 with this engine, because it's just so smooth. The only unsmooth part still, even with this 2026 model year, is the second gear of this Mazda designed eSkyactive 8-speed automatic gearbox. Now, that 48-volt motor powers an electric motor that is sandwiched in between the gearbox and the engine, which is in there. So there's a little bit of some funkiness that occurs in every single one of these vehicles in second gear. It's a little, and it's really only when you're flooring it on it a little bit, kind of have like this almost grinding or kind of coarseness to the powertrain. Everyone says it's an issue. It really, I think, is just how these things are designed and built. I think it will be smoothed out over time. I've honestly even noticed this in some of the other manufacturers that use this sort of setup, even though those use a ZF automatic. They kind of have the same similar-ish issue, so I wonder if it's how these 48-volt systems are set up. Now, you can see we've just I-stopped right here, which means our auto stop start. We have a really cool energy flow monitor showing us our very small battery status. I think it's like 0.33 kilowatt hours. It's really, really tiny, but it's a self-charging 48-volt mild hybrid system. So this vehicle has an integrated starter generator as well as a traditional belt starter for some more colder situations. The integrated starter generator makes these moments completely seamless. I felt nothing. You only really just hear the engine turn on just a little bit in the background, and there's no startup noise or any vibrations associated with it because it's an electric starter generator that's integrated with this whole system, which is just so cool. Oh gosh, this engine is just a wonderful sound, and you can hear it a little bit on the outside. There's some pumped in sound coming from under the hood, but it's really not artificial sounding, which I really like. And again, these auto stop start motions are fantastic. So smooth and seamless. When you put your foot on the gas, you don't feel any sort of hesitation. Instantly, you have power right there, which is great. Now, we also have auto hold, which you do need to activate every time you turn on the vehicle, which I think is fine, but I wish it would just stay on if I had it on. That makes coming to a stop a lot more smoother. You can even see it turns off as we're coming to the stop, not even when we get to a full stop. It already has shut off to save you some fuel, which is great. I've been getting around 24 MPG over this week. A lot of mixed use driving. I did a specific highway run where I got almost 27, and I've seen 28 in the CX-70 actually when I did a lot of just straight up highway driving, which is pretty good. So that's right on around where the EPA numbers are. The infotainment system works really great. You can access Apple CarPlay. It's touchscreen in your Apple CarPlay function as well, which is nice. And I love how these hotkeys get reprogrammed in Apple CarPlay to go to your music or whatever navigation you have. And you can go home really easy by holding the home button or back to the Mazda system. I really don't like when people complain about the system because it's so easy to use. It keeps you undistracted, I would say. It's very, very in your line of sight. And once you get used to it, it's just a fantastic system to use. Now, the best part about the CX-90 and 70 on Mazda's large electrified architecture is that it's all meant for driving. Now, it's not as quick of a performance, I would say. It's all about driving, and you know, they do that in their architecture here. We may not have the quickest steering ratio, but thanks to our double wishbone front suspension, multi-link out to back, and that rear wheel bias all-wheel drive system and the longitudinal output, the front end feels relatively quick, especially for an SUV that can fit 8 people, mostly because that steering rack is pretty much in front of almost this engine, even with the inline-6, so there's not as much weight on the steering rack itself, such as in the transverse architecture vehicle. So you have this really nice, traditional, more premium feeling experience when you're driving a CX-90 or 70 than some of its competitors that are still using transverse front-wheel drive architectures. Now we also have something called M Hybrid Boost. So that's going to add like an additional, I think 16 horsepower and around like 113 pound-feet of torque from the electric motor to the engine when you're really on it in harder acceleration conditions like in sport mode. And it'll say a little boost thing there, which is really cool. So I like that other added benefit of this mild hybrid system here. Sport gauges give you a nice red accent, and it even works when we're in our more assisted view here, which is nice. I love these graphics on this display. They're very simple. Not a lot of crazy information that can be displayed up here still, but I think I like that. Keeps it very focused on our main driving information. We also have a heads-up display here on this particular CX-90. And in sport mode, this vehicle really transforms itself. The gear box is much more responsive. Shifts themselves, if you choose to manually do so, are quick. Nice inline-6 sounds. This engine just makes a wonderful, wonderful sound. And you can see going through these gears really rapid, actually, which I quite like, especially for a vehicle in this class. You got to think of the context here. This is a 3-row, mid-size SUV that's meant to carry people around. Most of these are pretty boring and kind of dull at their day-to-day experience. This is not. This blends a lot of stuff that you're getting from the more premium brands into this segment of vehicle, and this whole package, powertrain wise, you can get for around 39 to 38 grand, which I think is just a wonderful thing that Mazda still does for us. Passing power is really strong here. Yeah, this engine is just a treat. You have so much low-end torque in this vehicle. You really just kind of get up to speed so quickly and effortlessly. It really is no issue. So if you want a little bit more power, you can step up to that Turbo S. But this one, I think, is really impressive alone. 280 horsepower, like I mentioned, and this is all on 87 octane fuel, regular gas here in the US. So you don't have to be spending premium to get, you know, that full power output in the Turbo S, for example, which I think is still a nice touch. Now, in this Premium Plus CX-90 for 2026, we have very familiar driver assistance features. So depending on what trim of the CX-90 you'll get a different array of stuff. Pretty much you're always going to get like things like blind spot and a lot of collision warning stuff. This vehicle gets the 360 cameras as well as the full radar adaptive cruise with steering assistant here. Pretty easy to activate. You just press 2 buttons and you set your speed, and that's it. So I'm going to set my speed here, and you can see we have a really nice gauge both in our active driving display, or heads-up display, honestly has a specific name for it, as well as our digital instrument cluster here. Really nice graphics. You do have to keep your hand on the steering wheel. This is not a hands-off system. It's also not a system that does auto lane changes, which, believe it or not, is something that some of the vehicles in this class do offer nowadays. But this is actually a very nice system. It's pretty reliable and pretty accurate, and it does definitely reduce fatigue on some longer driving distances. You do have distance control here, so we have around 3 to 4 different distances you can set between the car in front of you. It takes curves pretty well, as you can see. It even mimics that on our digital cluster there. So it's all pretty confidence inspiring and works very well. And this has been made a bit more available throughout the lineup than earlier CX-90s, where it really was just locked to these top trims, which I thought it was a little frustrating. But it works well. I have no complaints here whatsoever. And on the highway as well, it's really quiet in the CX-90. You really have no buffeting or wind noise in this vehicle. It's generally an overall aerodynamic shape. And as I mentioned, they really have made some strides with the suspension setup, I think. It's much more smoother even on the highway. Before, I felt like I was bouncing around a little bit too much, and even in some cases over some broken pavement, I felt some, you know, jitters coming in through the cabin that were really unsettling. But they've seemed to smooth that out a little bit. I'm not sure what kind of tuning they did there, maybe with the dampers or the spring rate or something, but it feels overall a little bit better. Heck, it could even be a better tire that they fitted to this car for this newer generation model year. It's following traffic pretty well and comes to a shorter stop here since we have some stopping traffic all by itself, which is great. We do have a large panoramic glass roof, which thankfully does have a sunshade, which is a pretty quick operation there, so you're not going to be getting tanned on your head sometimes, which is nice. Our sun visors are pretty big as well, cover quite a lot of space, and if I don't break my camera there, they do slide to cover pretty much the entirety of the window, which I really like. So really got a lot of nice sun coverage there. You can also disable this stuff and actually just use this steering assistant if you don't want to use the adaptive cruise control. You can also see it just I-stopped right now. So we're now coasting with the engine off on the highway. And the second it detects that, oh, you may need power, you're coming out of a corner, it's going to turn the engine on before you even have time to think. So it already turned it on for me right there. It sees we're coming into, I guess, stopped traffic as usual on these videos. But it's a really, really smooth 48 volt system. I wish more automakers would integrate this. It's just a really nice feature to have, and you don't really feel it, which is nice. But overall, as I step out of a CX-90 or 70 in this case, I love this vehicle. I recommend it to everyone that I can. I've already had 2 family members purchase one out of my recommendations, and they always all go for the Inline-6, as I think everyone should. It's really comfortable. It's incredibly spacious. It may not be the biggest amount in terms of cargo space in the class, but for a Inline-6 rear-wheel drive biased architecture that can fit 8 people, feels very premium and drives well, there really is not a lot of stuff in this class that can do just so. So as we wrap up this video and stop traffic, I'm going to give you guys my final recommendation on the CX-90. I think the Sport, the new Sport model is really something to consider, as well as the Preferred. Gives you a lot of stuff, nice features in the $40,000 range, even though this one is fully loaded for the Turbo, at least at around $53,000. So really not a bad price range now for 2026 either. As always, guys, thank you for joining me on yet another video over here at Allcarnews, and please like, subscribe, and follow for more coming soon. Cheers.